In case you missed it, here's a clip from episode 9 with Rachel Foster of Long & Foster fame.
There's a lot of coaching that goes into balance and being a complete person. And so what gets me out of bed in the morning is being able to interact with them in meaningful ways, being what is called a servant leader, rolling up my sleeves and walking the walk. You know, if we need to put stamps and mailing labels on envelopes, I get down and I do that. Like whatever it is that needs to get done, we get that work done. But in the midst of all of that, we get to know one another, we care about one another, and it speaks to our earlier conversation about the culture of Long & Foster overall, that we really are committed to being supportive of one another, being generous with our time.
I'm really excited about this week's episode. We have Jennifer Jacobs as well as Rachel Foster in the studio with us today. Jennifer is the executive director of AHIP and Rachel is a board member. AHIP is a Virginia-based nonprofit that helps keep people in their homes when they may otherwise be rendered homeless because of emergency repairs that are needed. Our conversation is interesting and thought-provoking, and I think you'll enjoy it. I'm also proud to say that the Go With John show is giving back. Now, through February 12th, 2021, we are going to partner with AHIP for a community donation match. Your contribution will have double the impact to ensure your neighbors in Charlottesville and Albemarle County are safe at home through the emergency repairs and rehab programs. Please consider donating today to keep your neighbors safe, warm, and dry. The Go With John show is going to match the first $2,500 in donations that are made as a result of folks listening to this episode. Now, on to the show. Jen Jacobs, welcome. Thank you for coming in. It's nice to have you here. And we have Rachel Foster with us also. Rachel and I just finished chatting for about 45 minutes about her real estate career and her family and things like that. And we want to talk about AHIP today. So can you tell us what is AHIP and a little bit about what the organization does?
Sure. So AHIP believes that everyone should be safe at home. And that is our main reason for being. So we believe that everybody should wake up in a house that doesn't fail them. So that is, they should get up and down the steps safely and easily. They should have insulation so they're not cold in there. So their heating and cooling bills aren't out of reach. They shouldn't have X's on the floor where the kids aren't allowed to step because they might fall through. They should have heat. They should have cooling, anything and everything that could go wrong with a house. We want to make sure that people have that. And we exist to make sure that they get that. So safety and health and stability, housing security is what we're concerned about. And the other part of it is making sure that families who own their houses are able to hold on to those houses and hold on and preserve their wealth and help to build their wealth. Right. Especially in an area, and if you're in real estate, so you get this, for many low-income people, it is impossible to break into the housing market. So a lot of the families that we help have inherited their houses, or they bought them very inexpensively, or their parents bought them or built them many, many years ago. And if they get tired of the house, or there's a fix that they can't just say, you know what, I'm just going to go buy a new house somewhere. I looked up, I was doing a grant proposal a couple weeks ago, and I looked up the a median sale price for a newly constructed home in Albemarle County last quarter was $668,000.
Wow.
And so the average income of the families that we help is between $30,000 and $40,000 a year. They can't afford a well pump fix. Like they can't afford an HVAC replacement or a septic. I mean, all of that takes up too large a share of their income. They just don't have it. Right. So there's no way that they're just going to go buy something new because they're tired of their house or it's getting too expensive to keep.
Makes total sense.
And so our role is to make sure that the families who have faced extensive barriers in even getting those houses in the first place and don't really have any other option. If they want to stay in that house, we exist to help them preserve that property and that wealth. And most of the families that we help, the wealth passes down, and that's how it transfers.
Right.
And in the United States, that's how most people build and preserve their wealth these days and pass it along, and they can refinance, and they have more control, and they have more power. And so we want to make sure that that is afforded to people who happen to be low income and need some help.
Right, fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about what you guys do on the board. So we have Rachel here for the first part of our episode today. So Rachel, how did you end up getting on the board? Was that through the Agent Advisory Committee?
No, so not through my office. I got to know Ravi Rispetto when I first moved to town, and at the time she worked for AHIP, and I believe that she might have said to Jen, hey, you're looking to bring people onto the board. Rachel would be somebody that you might want to reach out to.
Right.
And I think, they knew that we were involved in and working in the community on the different projects that AHIP has that they encourage realtors to be a part of. And Jen gave me a call. I met with a couple of the board members and Jen over lunch. And
of course you said no.
She played hard to get. Yeah. Typical Rachel.
You missed the earlier story about all the times I was like, nope.
Yeah,
not doing
everything that people ask Rachel to do, you get the no first and you just have to work through it.
It's funny. I say sometimes that's true about my brother.
Right.
That he'll give you the no first, but apparently it's also true about me.
Yeah.
That's good. That's going to be a character thing that I have to work on. I don't know how hard to get I played in this particular case.
Yeah.
They asked for my resume, and I sent that in. And then now that I'm on the board, I know that that information is put in front of us as a board, and we consider whether or not the person would be a good fit, would be a good ambassador for AHIP in the community, would be helpful in raising funds or raising awareness, or both. So that happened maybe August of 2018, and I came on the board just before a big celebration that AHIP has done that they call the House Party, that was a fundraising event, and I've been with the board now a little over 2 years.
Great. So what happens on the board? So Jen, you're the CEO of the company, and Rachel, you're on the board. What is that, for the folks listening, what does it mean to be on the board? What do you guys do in board meetings?
Yeah, I'm going to let Jen answer that.
Well, for just in the spectrum of nonprofits, the board of directors will fulfill a little bit different roles depending on where an organization is in its life cycle. So for a lot of volunteer-driven organizations where they don't have a professional staff, the board members are like working board members, so they're the ones that are like stuffing the envelopes and doing the work. Fortunately for our board, we have a 18-person staff.
Okay.
And we've got all those roles filled. So in our organization, the board takes on more of a governance function, they're more of a policy board. They serve a guidance function for us, help us make sure that we're on track in terms of the direction of the organization, the vision of the organization, how we're implementing the programs, making sure that we're on the right track. So if we're talking about, say we're having challenges in raising money in a certain area or doing a certain type of activity, like small repairs versus large repairs, just as an example, like if there are things to consider around that. About 10 years ago, AHIP's been around for 44 years, and we've done rehab and repair the entire time. But we've also done other things like first-time home buyer, education, and constructing new homes, and we got into the rental property business, multifamily rental, in 2000. And we thought that was the area we were going to go into. We thought we were going to pair that with the work we were doing and make that one of our business lines. And when I joined, I was on staff before, but then I became executive director in 2009, we had this inflection point where we had to decide if we were going to actually go for it and do that work, or if we were going to stay focused on rehab and repair. And so the board got together, and this is an example of when it's really good to have all that expertise and knowledge in the room to help the staff figure out what the best what the best path is. And so we decided, and the board decided at that time, that we were going to get out of the rental business, that there were lots of other organizations in town, both nonprofit and for-profit, doing that work, but there was nobody else doing the rehab and repair. And the volume of calls that come into the organization for people that needing help, if we weren't able to help them, there would be very few other options for them.
Right.
And so we felt that our calling in this world was to make sure that we're available and well-staffed and high-performing to do that work. The challenge is funding it, because it's not an easy activity to fund. There's much more revenue on the property management and property development side than there is in rehab and repair. And so that's something else that the board is helping us with, figuring out how we become more profitable and more sustainable, so that we can continue to provide the service. But it's a scrap, like, it's not easy.
Yeah, nothing is easy, and especially charity work, because there's so many people asking for something all the time. It's always a challenge, I think, to raise funds. So how many people on the board?
We have 13 people on the board right now.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can go up to 18, is what our bylaws say. So we're about,
So you have about 18 on staff, and then 13 board members. And then most of the board members, are they all going out and doing swinging a hammer, building ramps?
No, Rachel is actually one of the few board members we have right now. I'm trying to think. I think because
I'm not here to call anybody out.
No, everybody has their strengths and interests. I mean, everybody fills a role. I love our board. One of the truisms or stereotypes, I guess, like when you get a bunch of executive directors together in a nonprofit, inevitably they start to complain about the board, right?
Sure.
But I have found that when I'm in groups like that, I can't. Like, I don't really have there's nothing really to complain about. Like, they are so engaged and great to talk to, and I truly come away from, whether it's a committee meeting or a board meeting, like feeling much better about the organization. And so it's energizing, and so that's really good, and it's very rare. But I think right now, Rachel, you're the only one who has actually served in a vault, like actually swung a hammer. That hasn't always been the case, but currently, yes.
I'm just curious. I'm just trying to get.
She gets the hard hat for the group right now.
Yeah. That's awesome. Good, Rachel. And
she's also helped us raise funds, like substantial funds, especially around the house party. And that's one thing that I spend a lot of time talking about. This work and why it's important and the mission. I spend a lot of time selling it and talking to people, and it is so beautiful when I get to hear somebody else tell me why this work is important.
Right.
And sometimes I forget that other people think that too.
Right.
So one of the things that most impressed me about Rachel was so she was on the board for that second house party, but you had actually spoken at the house party prior, before she was involved with the board. She was new to town, and Long and Foster had given a very generous donation and sponsorship of the house party, and she got up to speak, and I was like, wow, what organization is that? Like, it was really nice to hear, Rachel, the way she described the importance of this work and why it was important to her when Robbie did suggest her as a board member. I was like, it's one of the most important feature of any board member that joins AHIP is that they're passionate about this work, and they believe as much as anybody why it's critical for the community, and that really stood out in terms of how she describes the work of the organization.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Rachel, I think, do you have anything you want to contribute to the conversation about AHIP? I know you've got to run to another meeting, so I want to give you an opportunity to tell us how the charity fits into your life.
I'm just hugely grateful for the opportunity to serve AHIP. I don't know that I'm necessarily the best person to do it. I'm surrounded by people on that board who have experiences and have lived in Charlottesville considerably longer than I have. So they have connections that I haven't formed yet. But the opportunity to work with them, to see their hearts and why they show up, and especially Jen's, like to know what gets her out of bed in the morning. You and I talked about why I serve my agents. So she is so passionate about this work. She cares about, and the board does, and the people who work at AHIP, we genuinely care about the people in Albemarle County. The idea that I can go home at night and I don't have to worry about my roof leaking, and I can put food on the table, and I don't have to worry about whether or not I can pay my mortgage. I can't lose sight of that and the knowledge that many of our neighbors don't have those same assurances.
Right.
Can't count on. I shared with John before you came in about the family that we built the wheelchair ramp for, and AHIP also put the bedroom on the first floor, right off of 5th Street, that because they could no longer carry their daughter up to her bed. I just don't think most people go through their days and don't think about how many people are out there who they just need help making it through the day. The idea that they can't heat or cool their home. And, I have my heat on, I don't know, 68, and it's a little chilly in my house. And to think that there are people who don't have heat.
Wow.
Don't have solid. We saw pictures at our last board meeting of some of the families that we are helping, and there are holes in the floors and holes in the ceiling where a leak has caused the ceiling to fall down, and they live like that because the option of getting it fixed doesn't exist for so many until they pick up the phone and call AHIP.
Right.
So I am richly blessed to be able to serve with these people, to see the work that they do, to see their hearts, and how that plays out in this community. It is hard work, but it is something that we are fully committed to, and it is just such a blessing to be able to do it.
One of the interesting things is I spent a lot of time in Edinburgh, Virginia, which is not too far from here. Actually, it's just as far from here to Edinburgh as it is from here to Fairfax. So either way, it's 90 minutes. But, the people I think that need help are also very, very proud people. And I would assume the same is the case here. And they're probably not eager to pick up the phone and ask for help.
They're not. And Jen can tell you stories about, they've worked their entire lives for the University of Virginia.
Yeah.
And they need AHIP's help to stay in their homes, and so I think picking up the phone, just taking that step has got to be extremely difficult. And I know that Jen has a lot of experiences that she can share with you that tell those stories beautifully.
Wonderful. And we'll definitely going to get to that in the next segment. One thing that comes to my mind going up and down 66, literally sometimes 2 or 3 times in a day, is all the wealth and all the excess that exists in Northern Virginia, and how to get some of that wealth out to the suburbs of the rest of the state has been something I've struggled with really much of my life. Even things like, washers and dryers, people in Northern Virginia, when they move, they try to sell them, they can't sell them, they can't give them away, and they end up, a perfectly good washer and dryer goes to the landfill, or it goes to recycling because nobody wants it. Everybody goes out and buys a new washer and dryer. But then you try to say, okay, well, why can't we get some trucks and take these things out to Shenandoah County or Charlottesville, or get them out to the suburbs? And the cost of moving those things and storing them is cost prohibitive, So it's just this really very interesting place to live on planet Earth, where you have so many people in the state of Virginia who are struggling and need help, and there's so much excess up north. And I really don't know what the answer is, but it's I can see the challenge that you face with trying to get the materials and the things that you need to help the folks out. So we'll talk more about that. Maybe we can figure out a solution. So, Rachel, thank you for staying over and joining us in this beginning of this chat. And we wish you a wonderful day. And thanks again for coming in to talk to us.
Thank you, John. It was my pleasure. And I know that you're going to learn a lot from Jen over the next 30 or so minutes about AHIP. It truly is doing the most important work that I can think of in this area. And it's good to know you, Jen, and great to see you again. Please give my love to your mom and dad.
I will.
Okay.
And the other folks up at the McLean
Yes.
office. I'll say hi to everybody.
Let them know I miss them.
I will. And hopefully we can find a way to make some good happen out of this episode for AHIP.
That would be great.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I'm John Jorgensen, and if you want to learn more about buying a home or selling your existing home, contact us through the show. We work with an incredible network of professionals who can help you get through the process smoothly. Again, that's gowithjohn.com. All right, so we're here with Jen Jacobs. She's the CEO of AHIP, and Rachel Foster was with us, and she has just departed. So we're going to continue the conversation. So Rachel brought up that you had some amazing stories of folks that you've helped. Can you what are some of the? Tell us one of the more notable families that you've helped.
Okay, God, there's so many.
Yeah.
So one that it's going on right now, it's actually wrapping up. It's a very recent one. There's a gentleman who lives in downtown Charlottesville who grew up in the house. He was born in the house. He is now 81 years old, I think. So he's in his early 80s. He was born in that house. His parents bought the house, obviously, at a time in the nation's history and in Charlottesville history where that was not easy to do for a Black family.
Right.
And he stayed and he went to school locally, and then he left and he went to a tech and agricultural school in North Carolina. So he left town and he went and he did that. And then after that, he enlisted in the Army. So he was in the Army for 6 years where he served. And then his parents were ailing. So they were getting older and he felt like he was needed back here. So he returned to Charlottesville. And he started his, he had already served the country, and then he worked for UVA in circulation. I think he worked for 2 of the libraries in succession, first as a courier and then for the libraries. And then he left UVA and he went and served in the Albemarle County as a deputy sheriff. So he worked in the sheriff's office. He left there and he went and he had a 15-year career for the Charlottesville Police Department in the patrol division, where he ended up as an investigator in the patrol division. So he worked and served Charlottesville community in that capacity for 15 years. And then he left there, and then he went to work for Jaunt, which is the regional transportation service in the. It's a quasi-governmental. It's private, but it's contractual for the region. And he served as a driver for Jaunt, which serves the community in many ways by picking up elderly and people who are disabled. So it provides an essential service for people who live here. And he was a driver for Jaunt, and he retired from Jaunt at age 77.
Wow.
So he's a lovely man. I haven't met him, but I've heard interviews done by him, and my staff has met him. So he spent his entire life, from the time when he was like 21 years old, 77 years old, worked until he was 77, and his house was literally falling down. And sometimes we speak hyperbolically, right? But like it was actually literally falling down. The windows were falling out of the casings, so they had pillows, stuff to keep the weather and the animals out. The exterior wall was actually falling away from the house. So by the time our crews got there, we actually had to brace it while they gutted the front foyer and reframed everything so it would be stable. The reason he called us was because he didn't have any heat. So he'd been without heat for a year. And throughout this time, he got married, he had kids. His wife passed away 2 years ago, I think.
Okay.
So now one of his adult children lives with him, but he's widowed. So he called because he didn't have any heat, and they were heating with space heaters, and which gives heat, but it's not safe, and it's not adequate for this old house, which. Old houses, they're not well insulated, and
some of them have no insulation at all.
And we have seen that,
yeah.
right? And so So anyway, so he called because of the heat, and we have a partnership with Beck Cohen, which is a local HVAC company in town, and they have a partnership with Lennox, the supplier, and they were doing their biannual Feel the Love campaign, which provides a free system for a client. And we work with Beck Cohen year round, so they provide multiple free systems for us year round,
Wonderful.
and then discounted systems on the other month. So it's anywhere from 2 to 4 free systems a year. So they've been an excellent partner for a couple of years now. So he was selected. We pitched his name to Beck Cohen, and they picked him, and so we were able to go and do that. But when we got there was so much other work that needed to be done that we intaked him into our full rehab program, and are doing a host of things like electrical and plumbing upgrades, a new roof, and like Rachel said, there were holes in the ceiling where the leaks had come through, which just weren't safe. That we had to reframe the entire front of the house and redo the windows and just a host of things. The project was, almost a 6-figure project. But we talked about how do we get the resources where they need to go and make sure that people, one of the things that sort of stops me in my tracks sometimes is that people should have enough money. People should be making enough money when they're doing these essential jobs so that they don't need this amount of help all the time,
Right.
And it's just it just was very sad reading his extensive history and story and all that he's given, and the fact that he did not have the resources to either do it or borrow, right? So he doesn't even have the facility to borrow, and the fixed income that he's on now certainly doesn't provide the opportunity to save for that.
Right.
So that's 2 things, right? That shows how critical it is to keep this mission going and this organization going, and making sure we have the resources we need to step in, because we can't go back and fix the system, right? Retroactively, so we have to do that. But what can we do moving forward to try to make sure and shore up the resources or the public infrastructure that needs to be in place to avoid people getting to this point in the first place, and that's something that has been on my mind this year.
That's a tough question,
especially as we talk about things like we were talking about the eviction moratorium and all of that. That people, we can't just evict 10 million families, right? Everything would collapse, right?
So during the last break, we were talking about the situation right now with COVID and the tenants that can't pay their rent because many of them are servers or have jobs now that are temporarily stopped, if not permanently stopped, and they can't pay their rent. So the landlords can't evict them, but the landlords still have to pay the bank. So the landlords are getting squeezed in the middle. And how is all this going to play out? We don't know, right? So nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
We can't even begin to have a conversation about that.
Yeah.
But it's a tough situation. So is he happy?
Yeah, he is. And we were going to try to go out and get some pictures for annual report that we're doing, and he had something happen and we couldn't. So I had a chance to follow up. But we did the local NBC affiliate did a news story on him, and he was talking about how happy he was. So
good.
Like I said, I'm just grateful to him for all the work that he's done, and I'm honored that we get to help him this time. Right?
That's great. So you are here to fill the gap.
That's right.
In that scenario.
We fill the gap. Yep.
Yeah, but unfortunately, there's probably more gaps to be filled than you can fill.
There are a lot of gaps.
Yeah. So going back to the board and what you guys do in board meetings, so you guys get applications from people who need help, or if somebody needs help, how do they reach out to you? What's the process?
Yeah. So the process is they call, or one of their advocates call, or their family members call us.
Okay.
We usually have an extensive waiting list. I mean, it's been up into the hundreds, but our phones ring every day. So we always get calls coming in. So I would say, 5 to 8 calls a week of people seeking help, and sometimes more, sometimes less. But we'll have a major weather event, or it'll be super cold or super hot or very stormy or whatever. 2 years ago when we got all that rain, you remember that year? It just rained and rained and rained.
Yep.
The roof calls and the mold calls were just, it was just overwhelming. We had so much. So that definitely impacts the volume and what people are calling about.
So what percentage of the people are you able to help? So if you're getting, if you're getting let's say you're getting a call a day, right? Sounds about, so if you're getting 365, 75 calls a year, how many of those folks are you able to provide assistance to?
Last year, so our fiscal year runs through June 30. So for FY20, which ended in June, we helped 109 households in that fiscal year.
So about a third.
About a third.
So 2/3 of the folks you can't help either because the situation. What would be the reasons why you wouldn't be able to help them?
So the reasons would be that they, the person who called just before them has a much more urgent, much more dire situation than they did. So if somebody called,
you triage.
We triage and we rank and we wait. We have a weighted system in our database to figure out. Sometimes we'll wait for vulnerability. So if we have a disabled elderly person living by herself, we'll help her versus the family living that doesn't have as quite dire situation.
Gotcha.
We might help the family with the little kids in the room. Sometimes we have funding sources that are just for a certain neighborhood or area of the county. So if that's the case, that's how we triage. So there's lots of moving pieces in terms of what we can help.
It's not black and white.
And sometimes it's because the need is too great. So if we hadn't had the funding in hand, and if Mr. Brown had called us in the spring, we would have to we would have had to table that. So we probably would have tarped the roof, maybe gotten him the HVAC system, and hope for the best with his house. Like, I don't know if we would have been able to do that. And so sometimes if a house is too big, if the project scope is too big or too dire, we just can't, and we have to wait for funding sources to come in.
Right. So you have a wait list.
We do have a wait list, although it's not. Sometimes people don't wait on the wait list. Sometimes they just call back. So it's a little, it's not always consistent. It's not always a consistent measure of the need. But the volume of calls that we get and the amount of work that people need that we can't necessarily get to. So sometimes we only do a portion of what they need. We do the most important things and we have to wait on the other things. So they might actually be served and then go back to waiting for the next time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what do you need, your organization?
What does my organization need?
I know you were trying to figure out if I was asking, like, what do you need or what does your organization need?
The organization requires resources in order to do this work.
Right. So is it mainly cash donations, money that you need the most, or is it trade partners, or what? So what are you working for every day to help? And the supply or support the supply side for your need.
So so that's a good question. So there's lots of different resources that we ask for. It's money is one. Trade partners are the other. Like Beck Cohen is just a really good example of how we can work with partners to donate things that we would ordinarily have to pay for. So there's that. Other partners have discounted, provided us discounts, but usually we have a bidding process and we just bid it out. So we don't. It's not like we get all the stuff donated. So we pay. And we actually, last year we invested about $1.2 million into the local economy through the purchase of goods and services. So that's another sort of like thing that we do. We're not just like, when we describe ourselves as a charity, it just sounds like we're taking stuff, but we're actually like pumping it right back.
Putting money back into the system. Yeah, exactly.
So there's volunteers, volunteering is, so those are sort of and various volunteers, building volunteers, board volunteers. So those are the main resources that we use. Money is the best, most flexible resource that we have, especially when it's flexible. So if you wrote me a check right now for $1 million, I would be able to go back and invest that $1 million into the highest needs of the organization, whether it's a chunk for critical home repair, right? The emergencies that come in, like my well's not working or my heat went out or the roof started leaking or whatever. Into more complex rehab projects and to support the infrastructure of the organization, because none of the work gets done without the people managing, the finance guy, billing, the fundraisers, fundraising. We get a fair amount of public support. Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville have been incredibly generous, which isn't necessarily a given. When you talk about work like ours, the localities don't have to do that, and ours choose to do that, which is wonderful. And we get some federal funding sources and we get some state funding sources or whatever. But one of the, and I don't know if a lot of people who have spent time in the for-profit and haven't spent a lot of time in the nonprofit world may not be familiar with this, but when you go to Domino's and you buy a pizza and you give them $15 for the pizza,
right?
They take that $15 and they support the entire company. And
Right.
it's making the pizza, it's funding the people who do the work, it's the CEO who does the vision. It's like, but you don't go into the Domino's place and give them $15 and say, well, I want $14 to go just to that pizza ingredients.
Right.
And I don't want you spending any of my money on salaries.
Right.
Like nobody ever would even think of doing that to Apple or to Boeing or to,
Right.
I mean, it just doesn't happen. But that's what happens with nonprofits is
Right.
that we are constrained by a lot of the funding sources, and there are a myriad of them.
Right.
And so one of the things that we have to focus at all the nonprofit, directors and leaders and fundraisers have to focus on is how you cover your costs. And so we're a construction company, essentially. We're a
Right.
nonprofit construction company, right? So we've got this construction business, but then we have to add a second business, which is fundraising and
Right.
marketing
Right.
on top of that. And then we have to have another business on top of that of like funding coordination, partner coordination, volunteer management, and that sort of thing. And that's how we subsidize this work, which we can't ordinarily in normal times harness enough funds to cover the full cost of doing it.
Right.
Because these various funding sources and funding institutions, not just people, but funding institutions, have measures in place where we can only use 10% of the grant for whatever. So I would say flexible funding that we then take and very responsibly and measuredly apply to the various things. And I know that people are concerned that, we've always heard the stories about the nonprofits taking it and spending
Right.
it on things that, there's been many high profile sort of cases of Red Cross ran into
Sure.
trouble.
But not with your organization.
No, not with
Yeah,
not
exactly.
with most. Like most
Right.
of the organizations on the ground, we're just trying to do the work. And
Yeah.
and the thing is, we want as much of that, as much of those funds as possible, whether it's in-kind donations from people like Beck Cohen or Tiger Fuel, which is
Yeah.
another one of our partners we work with, to go out because the phone keeps ringing. Like
Right.
we just want to help. So money, that's the long answer.
Yeah, that's the short answer and the long answer.
The short answer is money. You got the long answer too. But yeah, so it is, and it's expensive work. It's not. When we are triaging, right, and when
Yeah.
we're doing that prioritization. So we've got. If we want to serve the lowest income families and the most vulnerable families and
Right.
the families that are having the most dire, life-threatening emergencies, typically those are the houses that are the hardest hit, right?
Yes.
Those are the houses that have been subject to most of the deferred maintenance over the years.
Right.
And so if we're working on an old house in the 10th and Page neighborhood in Charlottesville, which is a historic neighborhood, old houses over 100 years old, a lot of them, well, to replace the pulley windows and to put insulation and to, gut rehab some of them, which is what they need. And if we're looking even, more radically to rebuild, like knock down and rebuild, which we've done over the years,
Right.
When we have the funding sources to do it, that requires a lot of resources.
Yeah.
So, so going back to Rachel, having ambassadors, whether they're on our board or outside of our board, pushing for a commitment to this work and agreeing, like if the community agrees that this is something that we do need to invest in along with rental housing and support for renters, because that's, if we see housing as a continuum, right, for home ownership, well, let's start with the people struggling with homelessness, right?
Right.
Making sure that they are rapidly rehoused and have the resources that they need to get them back up and housed. And then we've got rental housing and all the continuum around that. And then home ownership, housing counseling, foreclosure prevention, and rehab and repair, right? That is a continuum, and it all needs to be well funded and well run by the municipalities and the state and federal and private
Right.
partners, right? It's complex.
It is complex.
It really is.
Yeah, everything seems so simple on the surface, and as soon as you start scratching into anything, everything's complicated.
Yeah. And I'm sure you see it in real estate, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's similar. It's just kind of the flip side of making sure that we're shoring up the foundation of that housing continuum so that people can do better in school, so the kids can do better in school, right? So that because the dividends that happen when people are safely and securely housed,
Right.
have implies better health and better public health and better
Yeah.
success in school and better success at work and more stable job force and all these things flow from that. So. Hi, I'm Jennifer Jacobs, the Executive Director of AHIP, a home repair nonprofit. We believe that everyone should be safe at home. We provide critical home repairs, rehabs, and energy upgrades for low-income individuals and families in Central Virginia. To learn more or to make a donation today, please visit ahipva.org. That's ahipva.org. Thank you.
So how did you get into this organization? What brought you to the organization?
So I moved to Charlottesville in 2006. It was 2005. Mm-hmm. My daughter was 6 weeks old.
Wow.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. We moved from
moving with a 6-week-old, or moving to Charlottesville, or having a daughter. You left the door wide open.
I did. No, so yeah, I wouldn't recommend moving across the country with a 6-week-old infant and a 2.5-year-old toddler.
Right. From where did you move?
From Oakland, California.
Oh, wow.
So my husband at the time, we're no longer married, but he got a job. He was recruited by UVA.
Yeah.
So he's a professor there. And we were living in Oakland, and we moved across the country.
Yeah.
Which I grew up on the East Coast, so I feel like I was coming back home. But
right.
So that's how we got here. In Oakland, I had been working for the National Housing Law Project, which was an advocacy organization that did a lot of legal work around tenant protections and preservation work and that sort of thing. So when I got to Charlottesville, I was like, maybe I'll stay home.
Right.
And be a stay-at-home mom. Like, maybe I'll just not work for a while. And after about 3 weeks, I was like, I cannot stay home with these people. Somebody's not going to survive.
Yeah.
And so I started looking for work, and that was the right thing to do. And so I found this job, and I thought, at National Housing Law Project, we were working in very abstract, like it wasn't tangible. They were doing court cases that if they argued it today, we might not know the effects until years later. There was nothing to really take a picture of. It was hard to describe and make compelling unless you were in it and you knew the technical wonky stuff.
Yeah.
But just for general consumption, like it was hard to convey.
Right.
I think it's easier now that more people are talking about it, but at the time it just seemed esoteric and hard to understand. So when I got to Charlottesville, I saw this organization, this job, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I could take a picture of the roof.
Yeah.
Like how it was so concrete, it was so tangible. And I loved that about this, and I still do. The fact that everybody can relate to when they get home and the HVAC isn't running and it should be. Like everybody knows that feeling of getting up and there's water all over the floor. Like and everybody knows that sense of dread or exasperation or like, oh, it's such a nuisance.
Yeah.
And then, so I feel like I can take people's hands and take them a couple more steps and be like, and now you've got, $10 in your bank account.
Right.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do? Like, what does that feel like to know that you just have to wait, right? Work around that. And so that really spoke to me on this. And so that's how I came to AHIP.
It's very gratifying.
It is.
Very excited about you. I can see you have a lot of passion for what you do.
Yeah, it's good, and I enjoy being part, like I said, of the family of housing organizations here because we don't operate in a vacuum, right? It fits into the whole picture,
right? Because
you can't have one without the other. If we do have and we've had people who say, you know what, I'm done with the house. I'm gonna sell it, or I need to go live with my daughter wherever, right? So some people just decide it's too much. But one of the challenges of living in a high cost area like this is that the options for where people go when they have to or when they choose to are very, very limited.
Sure.
So if we can spend $10,000 or $8,000 to $10,000 on a chairlift, so Mrs. I don't know her last name, Frances is her name. She had a chairlift in Orangedale. She can get up and down her steps.
Right.
Well, that means she can stay in that house. She doesn't have to worry about. There's one organization in Arlington that I know about that does subsidized. It's Culpeper Gardens. They do subsidized assisted living, and it's very, very affordable. And they are one of the very few. They're the only ones I know about in Virginia that do that. So there are missing aspects of housing, right? That people can't just, if you have the means, you can find. You might not like it, or you might not want to, you might not like the implications of having to do something like that, but you have the means to go do that. And even for people who are relatively stable, it is crushingly expensive.
Right.
So if I'm helping Frances in the Orangedale neighborhood with her chairlift, I know that is going to keep her safe and healthy, and she doesn't have to worry about having to go into institutionalized nursing care because there's nothing in the middle to help her get up and down the steps.
Right. Well, it's a fantastic organization. It's a great cause. It's a wonderful cause. So if people want to make donations, where do they go?
They can go to our website.
Okay.
So it's AHIP VA, so AHIP as in Paul, VA.org. They can also look us up on Facebook. It's not ahip.org. That brings you to some association of health insurance providers. Right. So it's ahipva. Don't donate to them.
We'll get some links up on the episode guide for your episode.
Yeah,
so we'll get
that would be great. So we're having our annual campaign now, our annual holiday campaign. So our goal, we're trying to raise $100,000 so they can donate online or they can.
So how close to your goal are you?
I don't know.
Okay.
We have raised, I would say. We just got some donations in this week. We just started it and the mailing just went out. So maybe $35,000, $40,000.
That's pretty good. So you'll hit the 100. You should hit the 100.
I hope so.
I think people are in a giving mood this year. 2020 was something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have had a lot of generous donations this year.
Yeah.
And to match the need. But
that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that folks are generously giving for those in need, and there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
All right, so Jen, in closing, is there anything more you want to add or that you can think of that we didn't chat about your organization? We know where to go to make a donation. We know you need funds. We know there are a lot of people out there that need your help, and I'm encouraging the folks in Northern Virginia who are hopefully have a little something extra they can contribute to help the suburban folks in the state of Virginia that need help.
That'd be great.
But is there anything else you want to add in closing?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk to you. This has been great.
Well, thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed meeting you. I enjoyed hearing your stories, and hopefully we can help give a little to your organization.
I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.
Like what you're hearing on the Go With John show? Let us know what you think by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and share this episode with your friends. To sign up for show updates, head to gowithjohn.com to join our list.